Hello and welcome to EE333. I'm your instructor, Gregory Myers. In this video, we're going to take another look at our vehicle management system or our vehicle system. And if you recall from our last discussion, our goal was to have a dynamic system that could be adapted to multiple applications. And specifically, what we were interested in was a application such as a Department of Motor Vehicle registration system, as well as a repair system. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to start taking a deeper look at the classes involved in our base system, in our base vehicle system. And what we want to do is we want to identify fields and methods related to these objects that can describe not only the vehicle base class, but then the subclasses that might be derived from it. And if you recall, also from last time, we had started on a UML diagram, specifically one for the class hierarchy, and we had sort of settled on this structure right here. What I'd like to do in this video is I'd like to focus on this first branch of this structure, specifically the land vehicle branch and the vehicle parent class or the vehicle base class. We'll also take a second to look at the motor class, and what we're going to do is we're going to break down those original class files into separate smaller class files so that we can access them in multiple packages. Because if you recall, the idea was, and we'll go over to our notes here, the idea was that effectively we had two separate systems. We had one for the Department of Motor Vehicles that might allow for somebody to register a car, and then the other system was a repair system where we would have, for instance, an employee such as a mechanic or a technician that would work on your car. And of course, in both systems, you fundamentally had the idea of a customer, although we did name them differently. And so our goal for today is to start breaking this down further into additional classes and restructure where needed so that we can handle all three of these packages or all three of these concepts. But instead of wasting our time rewriting code, what we want to do is we want to structure it in such a way that we can leverage as much as possible between the two systems. So to begin with, what I want to do is I want to take a look at my vehicle class. And we're going to start just down the road once again of just adding some additional fields to our base class, in this case, our vehicle base class. So here you see that we've already started on some of the fields. What I'd like to do is I'd like just to remind us of this discussion here about what fields comprise a vehicle. In other words, what attributes, what features would you like to see in our vehicle class? Now, please note that the vehicle class is an abstract class. That means we can't actually have a vehicle. We can't construct a vehicle, rather. Instead, we're going to have to rely on those subclasses. In other words, there is no such thing as a vehicle by itself or only a vehicle. So in other words, if one of your friends asks you, what do you drive? And you tell them a vehicle, that wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. Instead, you're probably going to tell them a car or a truck, or maybe even go so far as a specific car or a specific truck, but you would never even answer the question in such a generic fashion. So in some cases, what you want to do is you can sort of think of these abstract classes as being too generic to be actually constructed, or an object of this class actually being constructed. Once again, that's not true for all cases. You do make other classes abstract for different reasons. However, though, in this particular case, we want to think of a vehicle as being too generic by itself, and instead what we're going to do is we're going to rely on our subclasses for specific implementation. But think about the things that are sort of unique to a vehicle, or rather shared between all vehicle subclasses. So in other words, we've already looked at the VIN, identification, make or manufacturer, model, submodel, which we were thinking of as trim, and so on. But the one thing that we did not yet add was the idea of a motor. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to leverage our EE333 and you'll see that we have a motor class, and we're just going to call this one a motor, and we'll come back to this. And what we'd like to do then is, once again, we'll come over here to our vehicle class, and then we will refactor. We will encapsulate the fields, and in this case what we want to do is, we can do this manually of course, but what we want to do is we want to allow for the ability to get the motor, and then later on we can decide if we want to set the motor, or you could argue that you may not have the motor information at the time when you've constructed the vehicle, so in which case you might want to set the vehicle. So right now we can argue both ways for whether or not we need the set motor. I'm going to go ahead and check it for right now, and we'll decide then if we want to remove it. But then this simply will create a pair of methods, a getter and a setter, that will allow for us to return or set the motor of our vehicle. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus in on the subclasses associated with our land vehicle. And specifically in this video, what I'd like to do now is highlight why we temporarily put them inside of the land vehicle.java file, and also so that you understand some of the limitations of that. So to begin with, what I want to do is once again remind you of the access modifiers in Java, and specifically the ones that are associated with the classes. So you'll see that you have public, protected, you have option no modifier, and then private. But if you choose anything other than public, if you attempt to have more than one class inside, more than one public class rather, inside of a Java file, or for that matter, even a public enum that's separate from a class, then what will happen is you'll end up getting a warning. So for instance, just a reminder here, if we put public in front of our car, you'll see that it says that you have to create a temporary, a separate file rather. And so to understand what the ramifications are of this, you have to start by looking at the access modifiers. And let's go ahead and, in the spirit of this project, let's go ahead and see how this practically affects us. So if you recall, I said that we're ultimately going to create two separate systems that are going to leverage these classes. So let's go ahead and get started. So what we're going to do is we're going to create two additional source packages. One source package is going to essentially be the home of our Department of Motor Vehicle system, and the other one is going to be the home of our repair system. And you'll see that I've provided you also with an Excel sheet that is going to do the same thing, is break this down into different packages. So we'll talk about this in a later video, but basically what we're going to do here is we're going to separate these out into different source packages based on these package names. So you'll see for the Department of Motor Vehicle system, it's going to be DMVS. For the vehicle repair system, it's going to be VRS. So the first thing we want to do is create the two packages. We'll start off with the Department of Motor Vehicle system. And we'll follow this up with, actually what we'll want to do here, let's actually go ahead and create a little bit of a hierarchy here. So let me go ahead and go new Java package. I actually want to essentially nest these here. So what we'll do here is we'll go to new 333, and then what we'll have here is the DMVS. Notice how we have a package name now with a dot in there. There is two ways that we can go about doing this. There really isn't much of a difference. It's just how you want to structure your projects here. In this case, what we want to do is we want to include it all under the EE333 base package, if you would. And what we also want to go ahead and do is create a new package, and this was going to be the VRS, or the vehicle repair system. Now in this video, we're just going to get started on one of these, but you want to go ahead and set this structure up. And what we want to do is we want to dig into one of these. We'll start off with the Department of Motor Vehicle system. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to come along and I'd like to create a new Java class. And specifically what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new vehicle class. And essentially, this vehicle class that's in our Department of Motor Vehicle System is going to in some ways be a parallel class to the one that's in our base class. So we have our vehicle.java that is going to be in our base package. And we're also going to have a vehicle.java or a vehicle class that is a part of our Department of Motor Vehicle System. And I think you can quickly guess that we're also going to have a vehicle class that's in our vehicle registration system, or excuse me, vehicle repair system. The reason for this is that effectively the things that the Department of Motor Vehicle System are interested in and the things that our vehicle repair system are interested in may not be the same things. Like we said in an earlier video, that the mechanic probably doesn't really care who the registered owner of your vehicle is. Likewise, the DMV doesn't really care what repairs you've done to the car. So what we'd like to do now is demonstrate why we have a limitation here in having a single public class in a single Java file. Okay, and so what we'll do is the vehicle class in our EE333 base package, we have no problems with because it is public. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and extend my EE333.vehicle, and we have no problems. Additionally, what we can do is we can go ahead and create a new Java class. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and have a land vehicle also in our DMV system. Once again, notice the package that it's under. It's a separate, it's named the same, but it's in a different package, so there is no conflict. And what we'll do here is we'll simply have this extend our EE333 dot, and in this case we'll have it extend the EE333 dot land vehicle. Now, if we were to follow the same pattern that we did with our base package, we would then come along here and say class, and then if you recall, we had a class car. And if I say that we want the class car to extend our EE333.car, you'll notice that we don't have that option. And that is because the car class is in fact not public. So once again, if we were to come over here to our land vehicle.java and we were to change the access modifier to public, we would get an error, and specifically it would tell us that we should declare that in a separate file. Now, as I mentioned when we first did this, this was just for convenience so that I didn't end up with so many separate class files. But now what we want to do is we want to take a second to go ahead and break these up into separate files. So in this case, what I'd like to do is in my EE333 base package, I'm going to go ahead and remove the car, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new Java class. And in this case, we're going to call it a car. And I'm simply going to bring the code over. And you'll notice that now we have a public class car that resides in our EE333. And specifically then, if we go back over to our land vehicle in our Department of Motor Vehicle System, then you'll see that I have the ability to extend my car from my EE333 package. So for this example, we're going to continue leaving these subclasses, the car, the cycle, and the truck, as inside the same file as our land vehicle. If we see the need to later on change that, we will, but essentially what we're going to do is we're going to protect these classes from being extended further by another system. So in other words, our classes that reside in the EE333 base package are intentionally meant to be reused by other systems. So we want to go ahead and make the car public. We want to go ahead and make our cycle public, and we want to go ahead and make our truck public. So once again, I want to emphasize that what we're going to do for this video is we're just going to focus on remodeling, if you would, or refactoring this branch of our hierarchy. You can later on then go ahead and change the others as you have time. So we'll come back here once again to our land vehicle.java, the original one in our EE333 base namespace. I'm going to go ahead and remove the cycle, and I'm going to go ahead and add it as a new separate file. So in this case, there's going to be the class name cycle. I'm just going to overwrite this. Basically, we're just making sure that our cycle still extends our land vehicle. So nothing has changed about our class hierarchy. The only thing that we have done is we have allowed for us to be able to access these cycle and car classes outside of our base package. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split my screen. I'm going to leave the newer classes, the ones that are part of our Department of Motor Vehicle system, on the left-hand side, and I'm going to have our old classes that are part of our EE333 package, our base package, on the right-hand side, so that to avoid a little bit of confusion here. And so you'll see now I have my vehicle and my land vehicle. Over on the right side, I have my vehicle, land vehicle, cycle, and then car. We've already handled the car. Let's go ahead and handle the cycle. So EE333.cycle. And then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create one more Java class. We're going to focus on the truck. Once again, this is in our EE333 base package. You'll see it actually will complain because we still have it sitting in our land vehicle class that was in our base namespace. As a matter of fact, it'll actually warn you, and it will tell you then that there is a duplicate class. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and move this over. And once again, we'll slide this over to the right-hand screen, or right-hand side of the screen rather, and then we will once again create another class, in this case truck, and it is going to extend our EE333.truck class. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to continue to do this with your other classes, particularly when you have time. So for right now, as I said in this video, we're just going to focus on this branch, but you'd also want to do this setup with the other subclasses. But then what we want to do is we want to talk a little bit about what is going to make our DMV system unique. Our Department of Motor Vehicle system is interested in things being registerable and possibly even taxable. And if you recall from our earlier discussion, we had created a public interface that was registerable. And the idea here is that we would apply it then to certain classes. So in other words, if you wanted to make a car able to be registered, you had to have certain methods associated with it. Likewise, if you wanted to make a vehicle repairable, we would utilize our repairable interface. Now, we haven't yet done anything with these interfaces. We're actually going to come back to that, and that's going to be part of our assignment. But what we'd like to do is we'd like to recognize that the registerable interface doesn't belong in our EE333 package, because as our notes that we have over here, perhaps misplaced here, we have it in our user class, but we have our notes here that we mention that the vehicle being registerable is essentially associated only with the DMV system. So what we would like to do is we'd essentially like to move our registrable interface into our Department of Motor Vehicles system. So in this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop it. You can also copy and paste it, rename as appropriate, or repackage it as appropriate. So you'll notice here now my land vehicle, you see essentially what has happened is that we have the EE333.DMVS for the package. But if you also come over here now to the registerable, it is also in our EE333.DMVS. So whether you do that manually and then move the file in Explorer, or you let NetBeans do it, doesn't really matter. We're going to do the same thing with our repairable, and we're going to go ahead and refactor this. And just so that you understand then how this works, we're going to take a look at our source folder in NetBeans, and you'll see that now I have my base classes, in other words, the classes that are associated with my base package, in the root of the EE333 folder, and then I now have a separate subfolder for my DMVS system as well as my vehicle repair system, and inside of that folder resides the .java files that you see then in the tree over on the left-hand side of NetBeans. And likewise, there is our repairable interface. And so you can sort of see how we're going to structure our classes both on the file system, but then also in code. So as I said, the registerable is going to be associated with our DMV system, and the repairable is going to be associated with the repair system. We're not going to cover the repair system in this video. We're going to look at it later, but we want to go ahead and get started at thinking about our hierarchy. Now, we didn't actually do anything with these interfaces yet. And so what I'd like to do is I'd also like to take a look at the other interfaces that we have, the exportable and the importable. So we're going to leave these inside of our base package, because the idea is that anything that is in the base package should be exportable and importable. And then as you inherit from the classes in the base package, you will also get the importable and the exportable. Now, we're going to see what that means a little later on. But for right now, what I want to do is I want to focus on making our land vehicles registerable. And so to do that, after we extend our EE333 land vehicle, what we want to do is we want to add the ability to implement a particular interface. And specifically what we want to do is we want to implement now our EE333 dot, and we will do this as well, but we want to go ahead and implement then our Department of Motor Vehicles system, and we want to make it registerable. And so what we'll see is that any methods in our interface contract will now be required to be implemented in our land vehicle. But if you notice here, you'll see that our land vehicle in our base package was abstract. So in this case, we also want to consider making this class abstract, which means that all of the implementation falls to the car, the cycle, and the truck. And once again, as we start filling out some of these fields and methods, this will make a lot more sense. So we'll do the same thing when we create our hierarchy for our vehicle repair system as well. Now, what we'd like to do is we'd also like to go over to our land vehicle.java. And you'll see that we have that a land vehicle extends a vehicle, specifically extends an EE333 vehicle. And what we'd like to do over here is we'd like to make sure that it implements EE333 dot exportable, and we'd also like for it to implement our importable. Okay, and so at the very least, we want our land vehicle to be exportable and importable. And the same argument then can be made, as we've made with our classes, in each one of our interfaces. So notice, if we want our interfaces to be public, we have to put them in separate files. So we're going to come back and we're going to revisit this. I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. We're probably going to want to make our land vehicles CSV exportable and importable. So we may change this, but that's actually a good exercise for us to do later. Now, in addition to this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give y'all a sample of the Department of Motor Vehicle registration for your vehicle, at least for here in the state of Alabama. And the idea is that you can sort of get an idea of what fields and methods are required to make a vehicle registerable. But what I'd like to do now is I'd like to take a brief look at this Excel sheet that I'm going to provide for you. And the idea here is that you want to use this as a brainstorming tool to be able to identify either the field, method, enum, or potentially a subclass that you can assign to a vehicle. In other words, put another way, what describes a vehicle, okay? And more specifically, what describes all types of vehicles. And then what we'll do is we'll move to the land vehicle, and you want to add further description to the land vehicle. So in other words, what fields, methods, and so on make a land vehicle unique over a regular vehicle. Likewise, a car, what makes a car unique. And what you want to do is essentially you want to follow this class hierarchy down. And essentially look at what is in common with all vehicles, then look what's in common with all land vehicles, and then look what's in common with all cars, all cycles, and all trucks. So what my goal here is that y'all use this as a brainstorming tool to be able to describe, for instance, a particular attribute. You could argue, for instance, with a car, it might be passengers or doors. You could also argue that that should be either in the land vehicle and arguably in the vehicle. So we didn't talk anything about that earlier. If you notice in our EE333 base class, so for the vehicle, we didn't have anything yet associated with the passenger. Number of passengers, you can decide where that belongs, but something a little bit more specific to one of our subclasses would be our truck. So trucks typically have a payload associated with them. So we would want to have a payload field in a truck. You typically don't have a payload field in a cycle or in a car. Basically, the payload is the amount that a vehicle can carry. You could also describe that in terms of the gross vehicular weight. Once again, this is the part of that we want to brainstorm a little bit, decide where do we want to put the individual attributes and methods. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here. As always, hopefully you found this video useful. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to email me, and thank you for watching.